What is going on, Sabres fans, and welcome to another episode of the Sabres Spotlight podcast with your host, Matt. And actually, that's it tonight, fellas and ladies, who's ever listening out there. Appreciate you listening. It is just myself tonight coming at you with a solo Sabres Spotlight podcast this week. My buddy Ryan is sitting this one out, but looking to get back with him within the coming weeks. Hasn't been all too much going on in the Sabrehood here, but I had a fun idea for this little show concept that I put together on the side here for what needs to happen in 2024 for the Sabres to make the playoffs and finally get past that playoff spot that has been looming in the clutches, but we have not been able to attain it so far. So I got some fun concepts to go through here. We'll go through them one at a time, but I'm going to start with some big news. If you guys listened to the last show where we did our logo ranking, I updated everybody that my new niece was on the way, and shout out to McKenna Jean, who was born a couple weeks back, and super excited to be able to meet her actually tomorrow. If you're listening to this, I'm recording this on Wednesday night, the 14th. Tomorrow I got a nice day off from work, so we got a day planned at the fair. Gonna go to the zoo and see some Zoo Imagination lights, which is always a good time every year. If you've never been there, I definitely recommend checking that out. But I have not been able to meet McKenna yet, as my wife has been sick and has had barely no voice for the last week. So we've been staying away from the little one, but we will finally be able to meet her tomorrow. And just, super excited to share that with everybody, and hope that, we have a good time, meeting her tomorrow. And congratulations to my brother-in-law, Eric, who I know listens to the show and has been on the show previously, and my sister, Amanda. So couldn't be happier for that. But that's pretty much all I got for you guys. I'm going to get into the Sabres here. And to start, I want to just recap. Not that everybody wants to relive what happened last season, but I feel like it's important to lay some groundwork for this show today and go through where we did end last season. So, disappointing season, as we all know. There was just no consistency in the season. That was the 2023-2024 Buffalo Sabres under Don Granato. Felt like multiple times throughout the year we were hoping we'd get a win and stack some wins, and it just wasn't able to. It was a step forward and a step back, and just no consistency, no ability to string some wins together. It laid out for a frustrating season all year long, and they end up finishing tied for sixth in the Atlantic Division with 84 points. That was a 7-point regression from the prior season, where they finished with 91 points. And they finished 7 points behind the Washington Capitals for the final wild card spot. The Capitals, of course, were kind of the surprise team of the playoffs last year, and one could argue should they have been there, but they got it done, and kudos to them. And they made some moves this offseason. We'll get into that in the coming weeks as we start to go through our position and previews for the divisions and whatnot, but they'll be an interesting team to look for going into next season. The Sabres finished with 244 goals last year, which ranked 23rd in the NHL. Previously, the year before, when they had 91 points, they're actually third in the NHL with 293 goals scored. So, again, we talked about this a lot on the podcast throughout last season. There was definitely an emphasis on this young team to learn how to play more consistent winning hockey, finish games, close out games, play more defensive-minded. And it seems like that cost the Sabres some of their offensive identity. There was this identity crisis for a lot of the season last year, and you heard Don and some of the coaching staff talk about switching their identity after the first couple months after things weren't working and going back to that more offensive type style. And there seemed to be this kind of chasm with how they wanted to run things, how they wanted to operate things. And ultimately you get a reduction in goals, 49 less goals from last season with essentially the same roster, pretty much, with just a couple minor tweaks with some more defensive additions coming in. But you did get the increase in defense. So the Sabres finished 21st in the NHL, 243 goals against, and they were 297 goals against prior. So interesting numbers. You almost get a reversal on the numbers, almost exactly. Kind of funny when you look at the numbers as far as the scoring regression, but the increase in defense. But even though the defense did improve, still 21st in the NHL, so you're still below average when it comes to goals against, and that even comes with UPL having what everyone considered, kind of a breakout year and playing really, really good throughout the second half of the season. And if you look at the goal saved above expected numbers for these goalies, Devin Levi and UPL, they both had good numbers and positive goal saved. So the Sabres still struggled on the defensive end of things, even though it was improved over the last season. That prior season was all just run and gun, having fun and whatnot. And last season was a little bit of a roller coaster ride. So that kind of sets the stage for what we're going to talk about today. So those are some of our baseline statistics. These won't tell the whole story, but we're going to start to paint this picture as we go through. And what I have 6 or 7 concepts here that I want to talk through. They range from all over the place. Some are player specific, some are more team specific, identity specific / environment. So we're going to start with more of that end of the spectrum, more of the kind of like team specific goals, and then get into more of the maybe specific player projections and things that I believe should hopefully happen in 2024 for the Sabres to get over the hump and finally make the Stanley Cup playoffs. The first bullet point that I want to have here is simply score more goals. And I don't mean this sarcastically. It seems like an easy thing. It seems like a no-brainer, but I want to explain this further because this is not just as simple as, we need to score more goals. The big thing this offseason was, or one of the big things was, are the Sabres going to buy out Jeff Skinner? There's a lot of rumors around that. Should they do it? Should they not do it? He's probably not going to play up on our top line. So are you wasting that roster spot? Are you paying a guy $9 million to play on the third line? Did we outgrow him? Those things were all true. And I'm not on the side of disagreeing with the decision. Where I disagree is maybe where we didn't bring in more of that top 6 forward that everyone was hoping for, and maybe that is to come in a move with Patrick Laine. I don't think that's going to happen for the Sabres, and I do think they are trying. I just think that's going to be hard for them to get that done. We'll see, as much as that would make sense. But you lose Skinner, which is 24 goals from last season. In theory, you want to try and replace those goals. Now, that can come a lot of different ways. And Skinner wasn't the only player you lost. You lost Gergensen's, not a goal scorer, but you lost Sposter. So you lose some more goals than that, but you bring in some guys as well. But for the purpose of this section here, I'm going to kind of single in on Jeff Skinner here because that's what everyone's a little bit more concerned about. So Sabres scored 244 goals last season. Again, this was minus 49 from the prior season. In order for them to make the playoffs, I don't think they need to be at 293 again. That was third in the NHL a couple seasons ago. As great as that would be, I don't necessarily think that is something that needs to happen 100%. But could they get, say, 12th? I would love that. If they could get to 12th, that's where the New Jersey Devils were last year. And 12th in the NHL last year would have been 264 goals. So that's 20 more goals from where they were last season at that 244 number. So that's a 20 goal improvement from the prior season factoring in the 24 that you lose from Jeff Skinner, you're looking at 44 goals. Now, we already talked about how we didn't really bring anybody in besides Ryan McLeod, which we'll get to in a second here. But can you, looking at the Sabres' current roster, if they make no more moves, and this is the roster going into next season, is that enough? Can we bridge that gap of the 44 goals with what we have? I think that is possible. I do think that is possible. There's ways it can be achieved. The problem with this theory, and I'm going to go through my list here in a second, is you're banking on a lot of things to happen. Now, I don't even think that this list is very far-fetched. I think that all these things I'm about to mention here are somewhat attainable for the Sabres and for their players, but in a way, it's like building a parlay. You build a five-leg parlay. Are they all going to hit? Probably not. But we'll see. It seems possible. So again, you're looking for 44 goals somewhere. Tage is the number one person I want to start with. He has 29 last season. Can Tage get to 40 goals? I think he could. I mean, he's done it before. And it's noted that he had some injuries last year and dealt with some issues as far as the wrist is concerned, and that clearly affected his shooting ability, his stick handling, some of the highlight reel goals that we had become accustomed to seeing Tage generate and create. So can he go, and he still scored 29. So can he get from 29 to 40? I think so. So there's 11. We're talking about Dylan Cozens. Dylan Cozens last year was not a strong year for Dylan Cozens. That can be because of a lot of things. That's for Appert and Lindy to figure out. That's why they're the coaches. But Cozens has 18 goals last year. Can he get to 30? He's done it before. He did it a couple years ago. And I think that part of Dylan Cozens' game is still there. I don't think that just went away. This guy had some terrible, terrible luck last season shooting the puck. Don't get me wrong, he did not look good most of the time. He had a lot of games where he did not look good. He got banged up early on in the season a little bit too. Looked a little bit timid at times. Seemed like he himself was going through a little bit of identity crisis as well. The puck wasn't going in the net for him. Started to kind of bruise around a little bit, which is some of the stuff he was doing earlier in his career. And I think his play style is somewhere in the middle. I like that aggressive side from him. I want him to show that, but I think he can be a little bit more of a goal scorer as well. And he's shown that before. So can he get hot? Can he find the net a little bit more? I think so. So we're going to say Cozens gets us from 18 to 30. We get 12 goals there. Jack Quinn is the next player I want to talk about. Jack Quinn was not here a lot last year. The games he played, he looked pretty damn good. He scored 9 goals last season and not a lot of games played. Now, I think Jack Quinn, we talked about J.J. Peterka last year scoring, I believe, 28 goals. I think he was just under Tage Thompson for the team leading goals. Can Jack Quinn get to 25 goals? I don't want to put Jack Quinn up at 30 or 40 goals right now because I need to see him stay healthy. But can he get? I think that is a ceiling that he has, definitely. I'm a huge fan of Jack Quinn. I think he has a knack to find the net. So can he go from 9 goals to 25 goals? Now that's banking on him staying healthy. Again, that's the question mark. Something he hasn't been able to do. Injury is random. It's hard to predict injury. So you would hope the law of averages would say that Quinn's going to finally have a good season. I mean, he's going to want to play as much as possible because he's looking for a new deal as well. So the more he plays on the ice, the more time he has on the ice, the more time he has to generate scoring chances, accumulate points. And that's going to lead to him getting hopefully a bridge deal with the Sabres. So he's going to want to play, and he's going to want to play good. I'm going to give him 25 goals, so we get 16 from Jack Quinn, 11 from Tage, 12 from Cozens, 16 from Quinn. That's 39. We need 5 more goals. How about Ryan McLeod? can Ryan McLeod be the 3C that we're all looking for? Now, McLeod perennially hasn't really been a goal scorer. The most that he's been kind of perennially around like a 10 goal scorer. Can that increase with the Sabres? Hopefully. If Casey Middlestat was here for many, many years. Casey Middle and everyone's kind of, well, not everyone, but people are upset about Casey leaving and joining Colorado, and that's another guy whose goal production we have to replace. Well, even Casey's most productive goal season scoring here was 15 in 2022, 2023. 15 goals. Can Ryan McLeod do that? I think so. And at the very least, you're thinking he's going to be around there. So that's somewhat of a wash with those two guys. But from your 3C with Skinner gone, can McLeod get you 15 goals? I think so. And then we got a full season of Bowen Byram. Now, Byram last year came over from Colorado, scored a couple goals quickly. And then the jaws of Don Granato got sunken into his play, and it seemed like he had kind of a hard time fitting in, used to a different type of play style, and you could tell it just wasn't a good fit. But Lindy's got a whole offseason now to work with these guys and get them conditioned and get them playing the way that he wants to play. And what is Byram's ceiling as far as scoring goals? He's a defensive player, but he's known to activate offensively. He has good skill with the puck. So is that another defensive source that we can generate some more goals from? I think absolutely. Last couple players I want to mention here is Owen Power and Zach Benson. I believe that these two guys are a couple good candidates on the Sabres for next season to have some positive scoring regression. We've seen Owen Power's ability to score goals. Last season, he only had 6, but he was looking for his shot more. I thought despite him only having 6 goals, I thought that he was shooting more. He was looking to activate more offensively. And I do want him to be able to use his size a little bit more and break the puck out better. But he's good at that. The game, you can tell, is just still a little quick for him. That's going to continue to slow down. So as the game continues to slow down for him, and he can just process it better mentally. He's not slowing the game down physically. He's just slowing the game down mentally in his head. Still playing as fast as possible, just making quicker decisions. Can that lead to some positive scoring regression for Owen Power? Take him from like 6 to 10, maybe. Zach Benson is a player that I love. Zach Benson had 11 goals last season, playing all over the place. The dude was jumbled all over the place because he was one of our best players at 18, 19, however the heck old the little goblin was, and he was plug and play. He played good wherever because he has a well-rounded game. So can Zach Benson, and he got robbed a ton last year. So can he have some positive scoring regression? So this is all to say that, yes, we lost Jeff Skinner. Yeah, no, we did not sign a top 6 forward. But is there enough on the Sabres currently right now to get back to not necessarily all the way to where they were before, scoring 293 goals and third in the NHL, but to be kind of in that top 12 and have a better shot at making the playoffs? I think there's enough there. I definitely think there's enough there. I just laid out 6 different options. You don't even need all 6 of those to hit. If you can get 4 out of 6 of those, then you could do it. Now, this can go a lot of different ways. I'm not saying this is for sure going to happen, but I can appreciate there being enough options for just this team growing and getting better, and hopefully that leads to more scoring on the ice and more consistently. Not to mention my last little point here. I hope that Lindy Ruff and Seth Appert can figure out this power play because it was terrible last year. It no doubt cost us, in its own right, probably 4 or 5 games just because of a lack of power play production. And they got to get that figured out. And I think they can with Appert. He's been known to help with the power play, and he connects with the players, and he's coached a lot of these players, and him and Lindy seem to have a good rapport right now. So we'll see where that can take us. But there it is. I'm kind of laying out the map for replacing Skinner and having more goal production. The second point is called Satiate the Sabrehood. Everyone who listens to this show knows I'm a big fan of the Sabrehood. Hashtag Sabrehood. Love everybody in the Sabrehood here. 21-19-1 though in KeyBank Arena last season. 43 home points. We're tied for 12th in the Eastern Conference with Ottawa. In the Eastern Conference, not even in the NHL. So almost dead last in the Eastern Conference. Only New Jersey, Montreal, and Columbus had fewer home points last season. That is just something that has to improve next season. The year prior, they were really good on the road. Last year on the road, they were okay, around the same record. But you have to improve at home. So whatever it is for these guys, I've talked about on the show here before. I think they want to be that team so badly that gets the Sabres over the hump and restores hockey in Buffalo, and they put so much pressure on themselves when playing at home. And the fans are running out of patience. There was all the booing last year. The game against Columbus, which I unfortunately was at, where they lost 9-4. 2/3, three-quarters of the stadium is empty by the end of the game, but you're still hearing fire Donnie chants, and then the media gets to the locker room after, coaches get back to the room, and you got a handful of players left. There was just something about the Sabres being at home last year that didn't feel like an advantage. I mean, the game against Toronto was all the games against Toronto. Embarrassing. Just how much blue and white you see, how many Maple Leaf jerseys you see. We had a show titled Scotiabank South because that's what it felt like. And that just can't happen. But the first step to that is the players putting a better product on the ice and winning at home. I mean, I haven't gone to a winning game in 3 years. And there's probably a lot, and I don't go to a bunch of games every year. I go to probably a few games each year. But there's a lot of fans who can probably say the same thing. Yeah, I've gone to a few years and they never win just because they have not won at home. So this is where I think Lindy and the new coaching staff can help with that. But put that new video board to use and let's see some highlights. Let's see some goal highlights on that thing. You got a new roof, no more leaks. You got a new video board. Those are some good steps. Now let's start filling the net and let's bring that home advantage back to KeyBank Arena next season. I think that will make a big difference. The next item I have listed here is sometimes losers win. This is pertaining to getting to overtime more. The Sabres were 20th in the NHL last season with 6 overtime games. Of the 12 teams with less overtime games than the Sabres, 5 of those made the playoffs. And you might think to yourself, that's not a bad ratio. That's almost 50% of the teams who had less overtime games than the Sabres that still made the playoffs. So how important is it? Well, let me give you that list of teams. Starting off with Florida, the Stanley Cup champions. Edmonton, the Western Conference winners. Winnipeg, who has a Vezina winner goalie. Nashville, who also has one of the higher skilled goaltending in the league, and the New York Rangers. So it's fair to say of the 5 playoff teams who made the playoffs last season with less overtime games than the Sabres, 4 of those 5 teams have elite goaltending. Looking at Florida, Winnipeg, Nashville, and the Rangers. And that other team, Edmonton, probably has the best player in the world on it. So you have some outliers there that help. My main point here is that the Sabres are not one of these teams. As much as I love UPL, and does UPL have a ceiling to be a top, third-tier goalie? I think so, but he's not there right now. He showed some awesome strides last year, and hopefully we can continue that into next season. But the Sabres, they're put together well, but they don't have an Austin Matthews. They don't have a Connor McDavid. They don't have a Leon Draisaitl. They don't have a a top player. They have a lot of skill sets that are similar, that can be complementary. But of those middling teams that are pushing for those last playoff spots that maybe don't have some of the roster anomalies that can push you over the top, you have to find a way to eke out points in those tough games. I mean, look at the Islanders. The Islanders are the kings of this. The Penguins are another team. These teams just find ways with their veteran leadership to just eke out points. And I know Pittsburgh didn't make the playoffs last year, but how often do they not make it? And the Islanders made the playoffs last year and the year before. And these are the teams that you're going to be directly competing with. So hopefully Lindy Ruff can help with some of these close games, the in-game tactics that Donnie Granato seemed to struggle with so much, player conditioning, improving, and not running out of steam in the third periods of these games. But you're gonna be battling with these middle teams for those last couple of playoff spots, and you got to find a way to get to overtime more. You can't just do it 6 times out of a year. Those points stack. A couple overtime games is the equivalent of a win in the NHL. So the more you do it, as the title of this segment says, sometimes losers win, and that's what you got to do. This one's going to pair nicely with my next topic here, which I have titled Best in Middle Class. And this is talking about those middle teams. So if you look at the way the divisions are set up right now, I think the Atlantic Division looks a lot more competitive than the Metro Division going into next season. If you look at the Atlantic, we'll give our projections in some of the upcoming shows like we did prior to last season, and as things get closer, rosters finalized and whatnot. But as of right now, I think it's pretty fair to assume in the Atlantic, your top 3 teams are going to be Florida, Boston, and Toronto. Florida's going to be good again. Boston is a team that I just feel like I need to see their demise before I actually believe it, because they just are a team that finds a way to get it done and finds a way to make it work with whoever they have. And then Toronto, I think, is got the goal scoring and enough of a complete lineup to be in solidly in the top 3 in the Atlantic Division there. Now the Metro is where it gets a little interesting. I think you can probably pen in the Rangers and Carolina. I don't think Carolina is as good as they were last year, but I don't think the drop-off will be steep enough to necessarily drop them out of a top 3 position in the Metro. And then I'm kind of thinking New Jersey could get that 3rd spot as of right now in the Metro. I like some of their offseason move, but the point of this is being that as far as the Atlantic Division goes, you're competing likely with Tampa Bay and Detroit from the Atlantic Division. Going over to the Metro, you're probably competing with, if we assume for this thought exercise, the Devils getting 3rd in the Metro. Out of the Metro, you're competing with Washington and Pittsburgh. So that clump of teams, Buffalo, Washington, Tampa Bay, Detroit, and Pittsburgh, that's your middle class right there. You could throw Jersey in there too if you want. I think those top 5 are kind of set in stone. Only 7 teams or 8 teams are going to get in. So you have to beat out some of this middle class here between Washington, Tampa Bay, Detroit, and Pittsburgh. Now, me personally, I don't feel as worried about Pittsburgh and Detroit. I think Pittsburgh's aging. They didn't make a ton of moves this offseason. Detroit, just weird vibes right now in the Motor City. Don't know how much better they are than last year. Washington, again, intriguing. They made some moves, but how well are those going to moves? How well are those players going to work synergistically? they are well coached. I think Spencer Carberry showed last season. I mean, he took a team to the playoffs with a negative goal differential. So I believe they have a good coach in Washington. We'll see. Sometimes these coaches flame out, but as of right now, I would assume they're well coached, so they're interesting. I think Tampa Bay could still very well be the leader for wild card one. So, in my opinion, right now, the Sabres are working towards that final wild card spot against Washington. Really. Washington, and then to a lesser degree, Pittsburgh and Detroit. So circle those games on the calendar and make those teams pay for when you play them, because those are 4-point swings against those teams every single time you play them. You gotta have wins. You gotta have wins against those teams that you're going to be directly competing for. And we saw it this year, and we saw it last year, and hopefully they can improve on that this year. That'll take me into my next point, which is play better and beat better. Looking at the schedule as a whole last season, the Sabres really didn't do all that well against tougher opponents. And they fared well against teams that were beneath them. And that seems somewhat cut and dry, I guess. That's kind of how it should be. But when you're, again, one of these middle teams and you're looking to take that step, take that jump into the playoffs, well, you got to win some games that you're not necessarily supposed to win, right? So here's some quick numbers for you. The Sabres were 22, 13, and 2 against teams last season with a losing record. It's not bad. That's 44 of 74 possible points. Nearly 60% of the points against teams with the losing record. That's 37 games total. So you're, not quite half of the games, but not bad. Against teams with a winning record, the Sabres were 17, 24, and 4. That's a 34 of 90 possible points. So 38% of points against teams with a winning record last season. Now, this is not surprising. The Sabres were not able to compete consistently last year, and they didn't have the goal scoring to overcome some of the deficiencies last year and some of the inconsistencies. But this is something that they're going to have to do. You're going to have to win against. It sounds simple, I know, but again, this is the building blocks. So you have to win against those middling teams that you're competing against, and you're going to have to pull out some wins against teams that no one expects you to win. Beat Toronto 3 out of 4 games. Beat Boston 3 out of 4 games. They play these teams tough every year, I know, but you got to be able to close the door and get the 2 points. And that's something that I want to see last season. Now, that doesn't mean you can't let up against the easy teams. You have to keep the pedal to the metal against those easier opponents. And you have to play better against those better opponents. And we'll see. I mean, last year, I think we were 0-2 against Anaheim. That can't happen. You have to beat those teams, and you have to beat the teams that are good if you want to be considered a good team as well and you want to make the playoffs. All right, my next point here is what I call lead the charge. And this refers to getting off to a hot start. This is something that Lindy has already talked about in some of his off-season pressers and when he was first hired at the initial press conference. This is something that Jason Zucker has talked about a lot, and I appreciated him talking about that in his initial interview with the Buffalo media, because you could tell that it's something that upon signing, him and Lindy had talked about. And on that episode, a couple episodes back, I talked about how all these guys coming in between Lafferty and Abel and Malenstein and Zucker, their interviews were pointed. Their answers were pointed, which speaks to the influence of Lindy. These guys were clearly given information upon signing. This is what I expect from you. This is going to be your role. These are things we didn't have the last couple of years. Again, Don was great for letting these guys play free and having these young players develop so well, which he did do well, and utilize their strengths and recognize their strengths. But he just couldn't take them to the next level. And eventually you have to transition from a friend to a coach and be able to lay a framework for each player where even if you don't have it all on one night, don't worry about it. Focus on your job. 12, 18 guys all focusing on their job every single night leads to a win, even on some of those nights where you don't have everything from a skill standpoint, from a speed standpoint, even focus, right? But if you're dialed in enough to know your role, to understand your role, then that's where you have more success consistently. But Ruff and going back to the original lead the charge point, Ruff and Zucker, they both talked about the importance of a good start to the season. You cannot play catch up against all these teams. You're going to be competing for a handful of teams every single year for those last couple wildcard spots until you're good enough where you're put in a position where you're competing for an Atlantic Division title every season. But for right now, because you're looking at more of the wild card, well, you're not just competing against the Atlantic, you're competing against the Metro too. So getting off to a hot start to this season is important because you can't be chasing 5 teams all year. Even if you go on a run, it's very difficult to catch up points in this league. So here's the first 10 games of the Sabres season for 2024. They start in Germany as part of the Global Series. They play New Jersey twice. Then they play at home, Los Angeles, the Kings. You got Florida, Pittsburgh, Columbus, Chicago, Dallas, Detroit, and Florida. So you got some division games right away. I want the Sabres next season to start 7-3. If they can start 7-3, you're already off to a good start. After these 10 games, you're looking at middle of November. If you extend the schedule another couple weeks and you continue to play well over those couple weeks, then you can set yourself up into that Thanksgiving break or that Thanksgiving time of the year to be potentially in a playoff spot. And we all know the correlation between being in a good spot in the standings come Thanksgiving and eventually making the playoffs. The chances are much increased if you're there, which speaks to the difficulty of accumulating points and catching up against teams in this league. So I would love split New Jersey to start the year, win and loss. I think it's probably too much to ask to win both. The beginning of the year is just too random, but win one, lose one overseas. Come back, win your home opener against the Los Angeles Kings and their terrible, terrible jerseys. Florida, you play next. I'm going to mark that as an L. And then I have them on a 3-game win streak. Something they didn't do last year. I think maybe they did it one time towards the end of the year, but they may not have done it at all, actually. I'd have to double check that. But we know that didn't happen a lot. So you win against Pittsburgh, you win against Columbus, you win against Chicago. 2 of those teams, Columbus and Chicago, you should, again, that's the lesser opponents that you'd want to beat up against. Pittsburgh, hopefully you can get a win. You're kind of level with them. I'm giving us a loss against Dallas. You win against Detroit, and you win against Florida. Hopefully you can split one of these first 2 games against Florida. If you do that, again, doesn't seem totally unreasonable, you're 7-3. You got off to that good start you're looking for, and that's going to be very, very important heading into the 2024 season. Something they really haven't been able to accomplish much of the last couple seasons. All right, I'm going to transition into my last 2 points here, which are going to be more player specific. And you already know, if you've been listening to Sabres Spotlight last year, that we've trademarked Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen to Ukko-Pekka Laakkonen. So this next bullet point here, my next topic of discussion is Ukko-Pekka Laakkonen to Ukko-Pekka stays locked in. That's right. So UPL starts 54 games last season, records 5 shutouts. There's no denying he had a great season last year. Ranked 9th in the NHL with a 2.57 goals against. Also ranked 9th in the NHL last season with a .910 save percentage. And he was hot after January. That's when he really decided to dial in, to lock in. UPL was 19th in goals saved above expected last season with a plus 9.4. Interestingly enough, Devin Levi was actually higher. He was 15th in the NHL at 10.7 goals saved above expected, which I guess wasn't super shocking to myself, because I think even last year on our show, I felt like so many times we were talking about games that Levi had played, and although he certainly had a few dud games and let in a few bad goals, there were so many games where he just played phenomenal, and he made these great saves, and the defense in front of him was just lacking. And you've seen the flashes, which is what you wanted to see. So who knows what's going to happen from Devin Levi? That's not what this section is about. I'm going to stay focused on UPL here, but just kind of interesting that, again, both goalies were ranked fairly well as far as goals saved above expected is concerned. But with UPL, I feel like the skill's always been there. It's always been evident with him. But last year, it seemed to finally click and all come together for him. Rebound control was much improved. That was a big thing with him. At times, it felt like he was shifting and scattering around too much in the net, not staying locked in on the puck and letting in some soft goals, but also giving a lot of rebounds up and not having the best rebound control. That was certainly improved last season. And now he has the confidence in the contract to back it up. So if UPL can stay locked in, can stay dialed in, show this Sabres franchise and this team that he's the guy, which I think they believe in, and I think he believes in now, that will be huge for the Buffalo Sabres going in to next season. Because if they can improve on some of their defensive metrics and make some of the strides we are hoping for offensively and have solid goaltending to boot, well, that's a good trio of things that we want. So UPL showing that he was that dude last year and he's going to continue to be that dude going forward, I think will be absolutely critical for the Buffalo Sabres next season. My final point here is called Captain Rasmus. Just give this guy the C. It's truly been, I think it's been a long time since the Sabres have had a captain that's been able to lead on the ice by both play and example. The Sabres have had good captains throughout the drought years. Oposo, good captain, sure, a hell of a guy. We talked about how he went to Florida and the guys loved him. And I mean, he got the Stanley Cup third, which shows that he had an impact on those guys in just, a handful of weeks that he was with them. So I have no denying that he was a great captain, but he was towards the end of his career. He just didn't have the play on the ice anymore. And it's important to be able to lead by both example on the ice and in the locker room, with your preparedness, with your play, with your habits, all those types of things. Gianta, another guy, kind of towards the end of his career, probably a great locker room presence, but again, just kind of towards the end of his career. So just wasn't as influential on the ice as hopefully Dahlin is and will continue to be. Since 2011, the Sabres' last playoff berth, Sabres captains are combined minus 87. And I know plus minus isn't the best statistic, but I honestly do think it shows it it has some credibility as far as just there's randomness to it, of course, but being a minus 87 just kind of illustrates the point I'm trying to make here of that the Sabres need a captain who's going to be able to be that on ice presence and that off ice presence. Dahlin has also been durable throughout his career, and his play is leveling up, and he's becoming more well-rounded. So in his rookie season, here's some interesting facts for everybody. In his rookie season, he played all 82 games and finished third in the Calder Cup voting behind Elias Pettersson and Jordan Binnington. And then this is all from hockeyreference.com. They actually have, I'm sure if you're listening to this show, you're obviously a big hockey fan. You've probably been on Hockey Reference, but they have all the past rookie teams. And this rookie team from 2018, 2019 was stacked. So here would be the lineup. Anthony Cirelli, Elias Pettersson, and Brady Tkachuk for your forwards. Dahlin and Miro Heiskanen on the blue line, and then Jordan Binnington in net. That is a solid rookie season. So Dahlin in his rookie year, again, plays all 82 games and finishes third in the Calder Cup voting and is voted to the NHL Rookie Team. He deals with some injuries over the last couple seasons, concussion injuries and a couple unfortunate things, but still plays 59 games during his sophomore campaign, 56 games in his third year, and then has been just a stud ever since. 80 games played in 2021-22 season, 78 games played in the 22-23 season, and last year 81 games played. Point totals in all those seasons, 53, 73, and 59, with 13 goals, 15 goals, and 20 goals. So he's a guy who, he does everything. He hits. He plays with passion. He can pass. He can skate. He can score. The guy just does everything. There was multiple games last season where you would watch the game and you could just tell that Dahlin was the only one who gave a shit. And that cannot happen. We questioned so many times on this show last season the accountability and the assertiveness of the captaincy. I don't think that's going to happen under Dahlin. And this team is ready for a changing of the guard. And if it's not going to be Dahlin, who's it going to be? I think it's pretty much well known that Dahlin's going to be that guy. I know Lindy Ruff in the past has done his whole rotating captaincy thing, but I don't foresee that being the case with the Sabres this season. I think he's just gonna pick a guy who he views as the guy and let him have it. And I don't need Dahlin to produce at a point per game. I'd love to. And there's debate on that topic with the contract that he has. I think it's $11.5 million a year. Does he need to produce at $11.5 million a game? There's value beyond the points. Do I think he can do it? Yes, I do. He had 73 points in 78 games a couple seasons ago. Everyone had a lot of points that year. Our shooting percentage was high, so there was some anomalies a couple years ago, but he showed the ability to do it. 20 goals last season was like one of the most by a defenseman in forever. So since I think like Phil Housley, but I don't necessarily need him to be a point per game player, but he can generate points and be influential on the ice while inspiring this younger core and holding them accountable. And I have no doubt that he could do that. So for me, he's the guy next year to put this thing on his chest and bring the Buffalo Sabres to the playoffs. And that's gonna be my last point there. I went through a lot of different things here, and hopefully laid some framework for what we're gonna continue to be talking about throughout this offseason, what we're gonna continue to be talking about throughout this season, so we can reference some of these statistics and things as we go forward. And if you're listening to the show, I would say make your own list. What do you agree with what I said here? What do you disagree? I think there's a lot of things that we can look at and learn from the last couple seasons. What went so right a couple years ago, and what went wrong last year, and what can we change this year to finally get it done? Because we all know, as frustrating as this team is, there's no denying that they're right there, and I believe the Sabres have enough skill to make the playoffs next season. And this, in my opinion, is the way that they do it. So with that, I hope everybody enjoyed this solo show and listening to myself ramble and talk to myself for 51 minutes. But this was a lot of fun. I'm glad that I went through this exercise and I learned some things along the way as well. So hopefully that everybody that's listening enjoyed as well. We will be back within the next week or two to talk to you guys again. But until then, if you don't follow us on Twitter, head over at Sabres Spotlight. Follow the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening. If you have any feedback or questions for the show, as always, the email address is down in the show notes there. And we will see everybody in the next episode. And of course, as always, stay safe in the Sabrehood.